set out to discuss a 20-year facility plan, and if you follow things in the local newspaper, you know that part of that planning conversation has evolved into a conversation around what we refer to as consolidation. So if I can start, or what I thought I would do is provide you with some information, and I don't want to just sit here and talk to you for 3 hours. I told 3 hours was my limit, is that correct?
Everybody asleep.
Oh, I've done it a lot faster than that. But what I thought I'd do is maybe I can talk for a few minutes, tell you some information, and then afford you the opportunity to ask me questions. And if at any time you would like to ask me a question, I don't have to get through my whole presentation, which hopefully we can keep that somewhat informal. Is that okay? Okay. Well, so let me start at the beginning and just share with you that originally, sometime last spring, around April, the district made a decision to do what we call a state study and survey. And what that means is that we take a look and do an analysis of all of our facilities, and for the purpose of developing long-range facility plans. Now, the Longview School District has been through this process many times over the course of the years. And the last one that was conducted was, I believe, sometime around the 1999-2000 school year. Most districts go through this type of formal study of their facilities about every 10 years. And one of the reasons districts do that is because when we build buildings, just like when we build homes, they have a life expectancy. Life expectancies for most school buildings is right around 30 years. Now, that's not to say that school buildings don't last a lot longer than 30 years, but usually in a public school facility, between 20 and 30 years, you need to start doing some major remodels or modernizations or repairs, because the sheer volume of traffic of a public school, that's about how long you can expect to go from upgrade to upgrade, or remodel, or fixing things up. RE Long has, for example, was built back in the 1920s, but RE Long wasn't built in 1924. I think is when originally the construction started, 25, somewhere in there, and it hasn't gone 90 some years now, 80 some years, that without any type of upgrade or modernization. So buildings wear out, they begin to fail, systems begin to fail, and so we have to look at our buildings and have plans in place on how we're going to keep our buildings working properly so we can do our job, which is to educate children. So as we start to analyze our buildings, some things that are facts, we have a number of buildings that are built in the 50s and 60s, and some older. Those buildings, many of those buildings have been remodeled or modernized, in some cases 2 or 3 times. And you get to that point where in a building, depending on its original construction, how many times do you remodel before you consider doing something different, which could be replace a building. So the facility plan is supposed to be a roadmap of what our plan is for how we're going to keep our buildings up and running the way they were intended. So we set out on this journey. We've done analysis of the buildings, the facilities we have, and we know that just to do upgrades for our existing buildings, the conservative number is somewhere in the $25 million to $30 million range that would have to be done in the next 5 to 10 years. So as a result of that, the committee and staff started looking at asking questions, is that a wise investment to continue to put millions of dollars into some of our facilities where maybe the cost effectiveness is maybe to either replace that building or not use that building and close a building. The other thing that's been a challenge for us is that student population, student enrollment in the Longview School District has been on a relatively gradual decline, and that decline's been pretty consistent since about 1999. Our current footprint that we have for our facilities at one time housed over 9,000 students. Today we have about 6,500 students. Our projections into the near future, in the next 5 years, indicate that our enrollment might continue to decline somewhere to about the 6,000 student level. Now, the one thing that we know when we project into the future, that's a best guess. You know, we only know what the real number is once we live through that year. But we do know that since 1999, our enrollment has dropped almost 1,000 students. We were somewhere around 7,500 students in the school year beginning 1999. You know, like I said, we started the school year this year right around 6,555. So it's about 954 students fewer than we had just 12 or 13 years ago. So those facts then started getting us talking about, then what are our needs? What are the space needs for the amount of students we have? And it's led to this conversation. I don't mean to leave you out, so I hope this is but it's led us to the conversation of, well, then how much space do we need for this number of students that we have? And that's where we've kind of landed on, is it a possibility to consolidate some of our buildings? And where we seem to have the most excess or extra space is within our secondary schools. We have 5 secondary schools, and when I say secondary, that's middle school and high school. And our underutilized space between grades 6 through 8 would indicate that we could operate or handle the number of students we currently have and what we're projecting to have with fewer buildings and sites. So that's why the consolidation conversation was even started. Now, the one thing that I think is important to remember, the facility planning committee, which is talking about some of these facility changes, they're simply an advisory committee that's going to make a recommendation to the school board on what this 20-year plan, facility plan, can be. It's the school board that then takes that recommendation, and that's the body that needs to have further conversations about whether or not to adopt the plan and carry that plan out. The second thing that's important, the board will adopt a facilities plan, hopefully, because we do need to have a plan of how we're going to maintain our buildings in the future. But if that plan contains consolidation, in other words, that we would be closing a school or schools, there's a whole series of events and tasks that have to occur before you ever close a school building. And typically that timeline, if we were to close an elementary school, for instance, as an example, that usually takes at least 1 year, 12 months at the minimum, from the time the board takes the recommendation and says, yes, we're going to close an elementary school, to the time you actually close that elementary school and do something different. If you're talking about closing a high school, which is part of the conversation right now, that's probably closer to at least a 2-year window when that would actually take place, and it could take even longer because there's a lot of variables that have to take place. Question?
Yeah, Chris, you talk about this timeline. It doesn't have to take that amount of time, does it? I mean, couldn't it be done quicker if you see the need for it and it's going to benefit monetarily the school system?
Well, it could, but those are generally that's kind of what I call the industry standard. The typical elementary school that closes, it takes about a year. Like I said, high schools are usually a year and a half to 2 years if everything falls into place. Because the first thing would have to happen, if the school board had a meeting tonight, which they don't, but just if they had a meeting tonight and they adopted a resolution that they're going to close a school, by state law, you have to have a 90-day window in which you conduct public hearings or hearings and take public input on that decision. And ultimately, you don't make a final decision until after that 90-day window. Now, sometimes in some communities, that minimum 90-day window, sometimes that takes longer. And that's how just that comment period could extend the time frame. The other variable, when we talk about closing schools, if that is the direction we go, you get into talking about attendance boundaries. So if we were to close, I'm going to just use an example, but if the recommendation proposal were to close an elementary school, that doesn't just impact one elementary school, because the students from that elementary school that's closing, they have to go somewhere else. And they're just not going to go into one building. So what that means is we would have to take then the remaining elementary buildings and we would have to redraw their attendance and boundary areas. And when you do that, that's a whole other set of series of communication and public hearings with the parents, the families that live within those new attendance areas. So again, an example of some of the other tasks that would have to occur if that were to be part of a final recommendation. And again, I want to stress, the planning committee is making a recommendation, and it's the school board that's going to take that recommendation, and they could say, you know what, we're not comfortable with this plan, we need to charge another group to maybe relook at this or look at this in more detail or provide us more information before we're ready to make a decision. Or they could say, we like the recommendation as it's presented and we're ready to move forward with whatever the recommendations are. So,
Chris, if you close the school, don't you have to continue doing some maintenance on that school throughout the years?
Good question. When you close a facility, you have really, let's see if I can count, you really have three options. You could close it and sell it, and again, the variable there is how soon can you sell the property. Mm-hmm. But that would be if you see that you don't have any long-term use for that, and you decide you're going to close and sell, the sooner you can sell and get that property off the books, obviously there wouldn't be any cost once you get to the point where you've sold the property. But if you're going to close a facility and then what sometimes people refer to as mothball or shutter, there still are costs associated with keeping the property. There's still some water use, utility use, and we've done a calculation and we were told that if you're going to just close a building and not use it anymore, because you're going to have to keep some heat on, you're going to use some electricity, and there will be some water used. You may not have to clean the halls in a building every day, but you're still going to have to upkeep it from time to time. There's going to be those minor repairs. So we calculated how much it cost to operate a building based on the total utilities and those yearly incidental costs of paper towels, cleaning materials, but not any employee costs, and just what are those costs that are associated with outside of the employee costs to operate that building. So we have that number, and then what we've calculated, we use 30%. So There's no science behind that other than we've been told by experts that depending on the building and the other circumstances, somewhere between 25 and 40% of the operational costs will be what it's going to cost to shutter that. So there will be some cost if we were to close a building and not get rid of that property. So, and again, we have a number, we presented those calculations to our planning committee so they can see what those costs are in real dollars per building. Okay, good question.
If you close Mark Morris, would the state be willing to purchase it for the college, or have you gone for that?
It's a good question as far as would the state or the college be willing to purchase the Mark Morris property if that were the decision to close that facility. And to be honest, we don't know. We've heard rumors that there's interest, but at this point, I think from a staff perspective, we thought that's a little bit premature to start going out and seeing, if someone's interested in a piece of property, because really, we don't know what the recommendation of the committee is going to be, and we're trying not to be out in front of what the committee recommendation would be. The other thing is, you might have seen numbers thrown around. We went over to the county assessor's office, and we've identified what we believe to be the assessed values in the eyes of the county assessor for property. But if we were going to sell a school district piece of property, again, this is something that's regulated by the state law, we would have to have a professional appraiser come in and appraise the property. So let's just pick on, I'll use Mark Morris because it's been in the paper a lot. And I think that what you might have read in the paper, if you read one of the articles, the assessed value is $18.9 million. But we don't know what the professional appraised value is. It could be, and again, I think things like what's the zoning in that area, and whatever, and I'm not a professional appraiser, but that's, we have to have it professionally appraised, and then by state law, a public school district cannot sell that property for less than 90% of that professionally appraised value. And the reason why that safeguard is in there, and I should back up and say, let's put a little asterisk by that 90%, but initially you cannot sell that property for less than 90% of the appraised value, not assessed value. And the reason why that's in there is so that school districts, since that money is, or that property was technically purchased at one time and supported with public funds, that we're not giving away capital. So that's really a safeguard of protection for the taxpayers of the community, that if we're going to sell property, we're going to get the, I guess, better way to put it, the fair market value of it. Now, let's go to that asterisk I said, that 90%. After a certain amount of time, and I can't remember how long that property has to be on the market, you can sell it for less than the 90%, but it can't be below 75%. So you have to demonstrate that you've attempted to sell the property for what it's really appraised for. And after, and I want to say 3 years, but I don't quote me on that duration. But at a point in time in the future, if you've made good faith effort to try to sell the property and it hasn't sold, then you can attempt to sell it for 75% of that appraised value. So,
Okay.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
How many high school students do you have at Mark Morris, and how many at Consolidaton?
Currently total, we have about 2,000 students. It's roughly, student to student, it's about 1,050, 53 at Mark Morris, and about 90 or 950 some at R.A. Long. Yes.
Another question. I realize the number of students have dropped, you said, since 99 or 2000. Now, do you have any idea, as you're looking at students that we had back then versus what we have now, versus what's in private schools back then, what's in private schools now, and what effect you think this piece of legislation that unfortunately passed in our last election that will allow funding to other groups?
Good question. I think to answer that, I don't have the exact numbers, but I know we track the number of students in the district that are homeschooled, which is a population. And that, I haven't seen the data for the last 2 years, but previously that number, I could safely tell you that was somewhere around 120 students that lived within the Longview School District boundaries were homeschooled. Private school was, it's a little bit tougher because we don't know for sure with private school if they're Longview students or Kelso students. So I don't have an exact number on how many students that live within the Longview School District that attend private schools. But we know we have students from Longview that not only go to the local private schools, but also we have students that go to private schools to the south primarily. There's a couple new private schools that have just been built in recent years, but we've had some students that have gone to private schools in the Portland metro area. We don't have that number because if they don't ever start in our district, it's tough to track because once, if they've never been as a student, we don't necessarily know that who they are. That number I'd say is relatively small. The population that's growing is just because of technology is virtual schools. And in fact, you might see commercials on TV about online schools and advertising, and that's probably in the last 5 to 7 years, the area of public education that's just exploded as providing people another opportunity or option to their local school district. And essentially, what it is, a school district can choose to have online learning opportunity, and a student from, because we do have students that live here in Longview, but they're actually enrolled in an online or virtual school, as they're referred to, in Spokane. And like I said, there's a number of these across the state. We have our own virtual program now. But that's, I want to say that number is probably close to students that live within the Longview School District. There's probably about somewhere, the last number I saw was around 85 students, but we know that's inching higher and higher because it's an option people are looking at. I don't know if we have 100 students that live within our school district boundaries that are going to virtual schools outside of Longview. But now when I say 100 students, I'm talking from first grade, kindergarten, first grade, all the way through seniors.
Yeah, so the students that use your virtual school, do you get as much from that person versus someone who actually comes to class from the state?
Well, that's currently, that funding model, it used to be 1-for-1, so they counted as a 1.0 full-time equivalent student. Then, I can't remember, within the last year or two, that was reduced to either, depending on how many classes they were enrolled in, it could be less than a full-time equivalent. And now there's legislation that's going to go back to where those will count as, my understanding is, full-time. In other words, we'll get the same amount of state funding for them if they're in our virtual school or if they're actually coming in and walking through the doors at one of our local schools.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if you close, and I'm not paying attention to this as close as I should have, if you're going to close Mark Morris, then where will the students go? Will they go to R.A. Long?
Yes.
Or will there be a new high school?
The recommendation that's been, that the Daily News published, that plan was to reduce back to 2 middle schools and then use the R.A. Long campus and the Monticello campus as make it one big high school campus, or the one high school campus, I should say. And between those 2 buildings, there is the capacity for those 2 sites as they currently exist that they can hold those, the number of students that we have and believe we'll have on into the future.
And I know, and another question I have, you know, our Long is so old, is that, I don't know, it can't be an ADA compliance because there's 2 levels. Do they have an elevator for
Yes.
students? I did not know that.
And-
It's been a long time since I've been to that.
No, those are good questions, and school districts, as you know, on the question about ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, have to be in compliance with that code. Now, public schools, at the time that they are either built and or modernized, have to come into compliance of whatever the codes are at that time. And so if there was going to be some work done to RA Long in the future, whatever the new ADA guidelines are, because between the state and the federal government, occasionally they change the rules and regulations. And so as those change, then the building would have to come into the new code. So, but yes, RA Long does currently have an elevator.
Monticello?
Monticello has an elevator. When there was some modernization done to Monticello back in 2003, and the elevator was put in at Monticello.
And there's a lot of property that I know, you know, in the back of Kessler School, that's been there for years. Nothing has ever been developed on that land.
And that's the other thing, you know, again, for future use, expansion, some facilities are, I'll tell you, being a staff member perspective, are probably pieces of property we should keep and maintain over others. And I'll use Kessler as an example, because in the event we were going to reduce the number of elementary schools, Kessler has a large enough piece of property that you could expand Kessler and add on to it if you liked. So it gives you a little versatility. The other thing about Kessler that I think as a staff member, that's a reason why you hang on to the Kessler property, is because it's in an area that's going to be predominantly, it will have school-age children on into the future. It's had a stable, consistent student population over the years. And again, we project that it probably will on in the future. So it makes sense to keep a school in that area because there will be enough students that could walk to that school. And again, if you can have students that can walk, especially elementary school children, you know, safe walking distances. It's important for all children, but you reduce some costs for transportation. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah.
Explain that.
I see that.
Yes, sir.
You said you had a plan for the next 20 years or so. What happens in 25 years if you have to build a $200 million high school?
That is the challenge, and why you can't ever predict the future, or I haven't seen the crystal ball that could project it. The positive thing, though, if we had to, in 20 or 25 years, build a new school, we're probably looking at a population growth that could probably sustain and distribute the cost of having to run a bond. Because as you're probably well aware, school and others, in order to make these repairs and improvements to our school buildings, or to build new school buildings, we have to pass bonds. And you, as a taxpayer and a registered voter, you get to vote and decide on whether or not the school district can go ahead and proceed, because the bond is going to be a tax on you to support that construction and the money associated with that. So the dollar amount can be daunting, but the impact may not be so much. I know you're probably saying, oh yeah, he's trying to sell a bond. I'm not trying to sell a bond, trust me. But it's how much you have to pay per $1,000 of your assessed value. And if Longview were to boom again and see a surge in the next 20 or 25 years in its population and and the students came back to that 9,000 level, we would, I can't tell you what the amount would be, but the tax burden would be distributed by that, the population that's here. And so, but I'm not going to tell you that it's going to cost something. What the impact might be to you, and if there would be a difference, that's what we don't know.
So far you just talk about the Muslim schools, because is any elementary school or the middle school planning to be closed down or something?
The recommendation, and actually the committee's meeting tonight, was to close one high school, Mark Morris, was to close one elementary, and was also to close the Broadway facility, which the Broadway facility is currently being used as a preschool. So it would be those three buildings are what's going to be discussed tonight. What's going to be approved by the committee, we'll have to wait and see what the committee decides tonight. So it could be more, it could be less. And again, this is just a recommendation, and then the school board is going to have the final say in what that plan would be.
I read all the things that were in the paper about it so far, and we've all been here for 70 years or more or something and watched the children. Closing the one high school and having the other one open and have a junior high wouldn't be bad if you chose to have high school only 10th through 12, because ninth graders aren't really ready to be, even though we do it. And the same way with junior high is that having sixth graders go there is kind of inappropriate also. So there wouldn't be any reason to close. If you had that group do it, you wouldn't need another junior high. You would be okay. But if you have 3 grades in it, you're going to have, an excess, and you would be tight. Because we took our kids, when the Mark Morris was being remodeled, we took them out to the one out there at Mount Solo. And so it was very packed while they did that remodeling. And then also, people who take the homeschool and do private schooling also use the state things in regular schools. They go and do sports and music. So you're still getting an influx of, say, a couple hundred students.
The homeschool students, yes, you're correct. A homeschool student can access the activity program of the school with which they live within the boundaries. Private school, if a student transfers to a private school, that's where they participate in any activities, unless the private school doesn't offer that program. So for instance, at Three Rivers Christian, if a student a student in Longview, family decided they're going to go to Longview Christian, and they have a basketball team, they have to play basketball at Three Rivers Christian. But that same student, if they want to play football, because Three Rivers doesn't have football, then they can. So private school is a little bit depending on the private school and programs they have to offer. Yes, you are correct.
Yeah.
So how did I do? Did I fill up my time allotment, or?
I think you did just fine.
Okay. So I'll stay around and I can answer individual questions.
I had to make one statement. She mentioned sports. The people that pay for their children to go to the private schools also are taxed, and they pay for the public schools also. So they pay double, because there's no tax tuition credit by sending your child to private school.
Yeah, that's correct.
So they're paying double.
Yes.
Last I heard, Long does not have any kind of pool facilities.
That's correct.
They're really, really ancient, or they've done away with them altogether.
Very good.
And what's going to happen? And the kids that take that running start, I think if they're at Mark Morris, I mean, it's so much easier just to walk over instead of being bused from Murray Long, or having to provide your own transportation. That's going to cut into a lot of that, the running start program.
It could, I don't know. I think if you want to go to Running Start, I don't want to get in an argument, but I would think the students that want to go to Running Start are going to go to Running Start, but I agree, if you're getting transported to, the Mark Morris LCC campus is essentially one, it's hard to tell where one stops. Being a former principal there, I would say it's more like one campus than two campuses.
Well, they've been talking about selling it to LCC since I went there in '70.
And I don't know if you had another question I didn't answer, did I?
I was, where would the kids' swim team meet? And who's going to manage the pool facilities?
And I think that's one of the questions, depending on what, again, the plan is. Do you put a pool in if it's going to be the Ari Long Monticello facility, do you put a pool in there at that facility?
That would be spending.
If you hang on to the Mark Morris property, then do you still access the pool? And again, those are the details, I think, until you have a plan or a framework for the plan, that you need to decide okay, now what do we do with it? Because obviously we appreciate and value having a pool and having the access to the pool. And so does some of our community partners.
Yeah.
Anything else? Otherwise, I'll be glad to stay around. I can answer questions individually if you like. So again, thank you for affording me this opportunity, and appreciate the time, and hopefully you've come away with some good information.